we're in Pueblo, West Colorado at Nick Nicholas's shop. Today he's going to take us through on how to rebuild a generator and a starter.
Yes.
A little bit about Nick. Nick's an old Model T guy, obviously. You can look at him. But he's been around Model Ts for 40 some odd plus
40 years, yeah.
Winner of a Montana 500 a couple of different times.
Yes.
So you know how to make a Model T get up and run. The career, you've been an electrician. We're going to see if you can fix a starter and a generator here this morning.
We'll give it a try.
Watch for the mail, I'll never fail. If you don't get a letter, then you'll know
Now there's good information in the Model T Ford service book, in the Model T Ford Club of America electrical systems book. If you'll follow these books, you ought to be able to overhaul a generator or a starter. Okay, here's some of the parts that you'll need to do a pretty much a total rebuild. This is the field windings. You don't always have to replace them, but if you're going to rebuild your generator, you need to put new parts in it. Here's the brushes. Sometimes the brushes don't need replaced. You can tell that by the size of them. Here's the insulators. For the bolts, you generally have to replace those because time and heat, these things go bad. Here's a new terminal bolt and nuts. Here's an oil slinger for off the front of the bearing. Here's a pair of bearings. And these are the insulators that go on the brush. And we'll learn how to, this is generally the reason a generator quits working is the third brush shorts out. And this is where we can learn how to insulate that away again.
from you, no words can tell how sad it makes me. Kiss me, Tootsie, and then.
We just looked at the parts that's required to rebuild a generator. The parts that I showed you here is about $105. That's if the armature's good. If your armature's bad, you got to add another $195 for a rewired generator. A lot of times it's better to go find another core. Now we're going to start the disassembly of the generator. This is a generator that I've already cleaned up. Cleaning up a generator is not the favorite thing to do. I generally take them completely apart, go put them in the solvent tank, and clean them up. You got to have a clean one to start when you start rebuilding. I've already done that to this just to save time. We'll start by taking the brush cover off. Now what I do is I loosen the terminal bolt and I lift the brush spring off with an old shoehorn, but you can use anything. We'll take the brush screws out. And we'll lift the brushes out.
Do it over again. Watch for the mail, I'll never fail. If you don't get a letter, then you'll know I'm in jail. Tootsie, don't cry.
Okay, now we got the brushes out. Now we'll remove the bolts on the front of the generator. These are kind of a special bolt. You want to take it easy taking them out. If you use a screwdriver that fits the bolt good, you won't have a problem.
Tootsie, goodbye. Tootsie, goodbye.
Okay, we got all the bolts out. Generally, you have to use a Babbitt hammer or something to bump it a little bit to get this cover to come loose. I've already had this in apart and cleaned, so it come off pretty well. And you can see that bearing didn't fit very tight. Now you can remove your armature. Then you remove the back half of the generator. These are all little 1032 screws by 3/8 long. It's hard to find them in a hardware store that's got a slotted head. Everything's gone to Phillips. Don't like putting Phillips screws in a Model T. With the terminal nut, we can generally bump this off. There's the terminal wire. Okay, now that we got the terminal wire out, we see that somebody has just wrapped the wire around the screw. We will put a terminal end on that one. You can generally reuse this wire. If it's bad, you've got to unsolder it here to put this end on and put a new wire on it. But generally you can use that one again. The third brush is the adjustable brush that you adjust the amp draw on the generator. And it's the skinny brush, the little thin one. And that's how you know it's the third brush. Now we're going to remove the brush bracket from the back of the generator. The third brush, this is generally the biggest reason that a generator quits working. The third brush grounds because the insulator is broken where the bolt goes in. Remove the brush bracket, and we do that by removing the 4 screws on the back. There's the brush bracket. It's on an adjustable ring that bolts to the back. The third brush is this thin brush. It's also an insulated brush. Generally the reason that a generator quits is here's the adjustment here that moves this brush back and forth. That is the way you adjust the amp draw on the generator. But this moving breaks this brush insulator, and that's generally the reason that a generator quits working. Okay, now we're going to check to see if the third brush is grounded or insulated away, and it's supposed to be insulated. So we don't want any reading between ground and here. And we don't have any. So this one has a good insulator in it, which is not all that common. Generally, that's what makes one go bad. Well, no, you got 2 insulated and 1 grounded one. Okay. And this one over here needs to be checked also. Okay. This is a growler. That's the way you check the armature. We're going to show it on both videos because it checks either the starter or the generator armature or any wound armature. This is the way it has to be checked. The armature in the starter and the generator are checked in the same manner. We've got a good one here. And then it also has an ohm meter where you can test just across this way to see if it's shorted or not. You have to have it on and it makes a lot of noise. We'll try right now with the ohm meter. If the light comes on, that means you've got a short. This is not a good armature. We put it in the vise to keep pressure against the socket while it's being removed. I have already taken these apart, so these are going to come out pretty easy. But the first time you do it, they're staked in and they're hard to get out. If you break it loose and just get that much turn, that's all you need. Then you go to the next one. Now that they're loose, you can take a standard screwdriver and remove them. If you mess up one of these screws, you can buy them from the vendors. There's the old set of windings. They're generally soaked in oil. You can see by your hands when you get them out, and I've already cleaned these. That's why I generally like to put a new set of fields in. You could get away with using these fields if you'd re-insulate this and redo your terminal wires. We're going to push the bearings off the armature because we are going to replace the bearings. Then we're going to put it in the lathe, and we're going to take a light cut off of the commutator to make it, you can feel where the brushes have been running, and it needs to be smoothed out. Then we have to undercut the micas. There's mica that is insulating the fields apart, all the poles apart, and we've got to undercut those, and we'll explain to you how to do that. We put a bearing splitter on the armature. We're going to use it to push the bearing off. Right now we're going to clean up this armature a little bit. I didn't clean it up when I tore it apart the other day, so we got to take time to do it now. If you blow this thing out after you clean it up, be very careful because you don't want to disturb the insulation on that winding.
The choo-choo train that takes me away from you. No words can tell how sad it makes me. Kiss me, tootsie, and then do it over again. Watch for the mail. Watch for the mail. I'll never fail. I'll never fail. You don't get a letter.
I think that looks pretty good.
Tootsie, don't cry. Tootsie, goodbye. Goodbye.
Chicago.
Now we're going to remove the third brush. Like this was broken that caused that to ground out. And the way we will do that, we're going to drill a hole right here and put a new tube rivet in there to capture this gasket and the back side of that gasket. This brush is still insulated and it generally is not a problem. And the reason you don't replace the whole gasket is you see this thing is riveted on from the factory, and what you would have to do then would be to drill and tap these to put in a new one. So we're going to start with drilling a hole here, and then we will cut the gasket across here on both sides, drill these two tube rivets out, and replace with new gasket. We will cut this gasket off to line up here, and then we will put this gasket on with new tube rivets. Now we're going to put in the new tube rivet. Okay, now we're going to reset that tube rivet. Now we're going to drill out the other tube rivets. Score this gasket and then break it off.
Okay.
Now we're going to score these to make them the same size as the other ones.
Chicago, Chicago, I'll show you around. I love it to bet your bottom dollar you lose the blues in Chicago, Chicago, the town that Billy Sunday could not shut down.
Now you have to shape the inside of that to make it fit the radius of the inside of your brush holder.
On State Street, that great street, I just want to say, they do things.
We've got our rivet installed and now we're going to roll the rivet. Make sure you put in the center ring. That's what ties it to into the generator.
They don't do on Broadway. Say they have the time of their life. I saw a man, he danced with his wife in Chicago, Chicago, my hometown. Chicago, that toddling town. Chicago, I'll show you around. I love it.
Now that we've made all the repairs that we need to, we're going to start the reassembly. Generally, when I do one, I put all these parts in the glass beater, and I glass beat them and clean them up, and then I paint them. And I try to paint a little bit on the inside, and I do that because now we're going to put a sealed bearing in, we're going to stop the oil flow to the inside of the generator, and you could get a rust problem. If you put a little paint in there, you won't never have a problem. We're installing the brush holder, and when we install it so the third brush is in relation to the notch.
To bet your bottom dollar you lose the blues in Chicago, Chicago, the town that Billy Sunday could not shut down. On State Street, that great street, I just want to say, they do things that they don't do on Broadway.
You just want to snug these screws because you may have to change this when you set your amp draw on your generator. Now we're going to install the field windings back in the core.
Things that they don't do on Broadway. Say, they have the time of their life. I saw a man even dance with his wife in Chicago. Ooh, that's my kind of...
Toot-toot-tootsie, goodbye. Toot-toot-tootsie, don't cry. The choo-choo train that takes me away from you, no words can tell how sad it makes me. Kiss me, tootsie.
Now that we've installed the field windings, the leads from the windings must be in relation to the slot. We need to make sure that these screws are very snug. We will finish and tighten them over at the vise. Now we're back at the vise, and we have to tighten these so they're very tight, so there's no play inside.
Watch for the mail. I'll never fail if you don't get a letter.
Now we're going to stake these in so they can't come loose.
No, I'm in jail. Tootsie, don't cry. Tootsie, goodbye. Tootsie, goodbye.
Okay, now we've got all the assemblies rebuilt, got the fields installed, we got the bearings pressed on the armature, we got the brush holder assembly in the rear of the thing, and now we're ready to start putting it together. Post. Take the terminal wire, put the wire on the post, put the insulated washer on, put the plastic insulated washer on, put a brass washer, and a nut. And we want to leave that nut kind of loose because we got to put it in the housing. Okay, now we take the terminal wire, put it in the generator in the notch with the wire going to the insulated brush. The insulated brush is the big brush right here that's on the insulated part of the brush holder. This brush, remember we crossed our leads. This brush goes to the third brush. This wire goes to the grounded brush, and this wire goes to the insulated brush. Put our cap on, and then we start our screws. This is where we want to remind you to make sure and put the lock washers on, because if these things come loose, the back will come off and it'll tear up your timing gear. You want to check inside, make sure all your wires are clear before you put in the armature. Now we're going to drop in the armature. When we put the end cap on, looking at the post, the block clearance wants to be on this side. Cap. Then we're going to check thrust and see what kind of thrust play we got, because we can't have a bunch of in play.
Watch for the mail. I'll never fail. If you don't get a letter, then you'll know I'm in jail. Oh, 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 tootsie, don't cry.
Okay, now with the cap on, we realize we've got a bunch of in play. That cannot be. That we're going to have to take it apart. We're going to have to measure how much in play we have, take it apart, build a shim to go behind the back bearing, and get rid of that in play. Okay, now we've got our dial indicator set up. We're going to find out how much in play we have. $45, We got a roughly 45 thousandths in play. So now we got to cut a shim to go behind that back bearing to get rid of that in play. I had some 20 thousandth shim stock, so we made a couple of washers and put them in the bottom. These are the brushes that I removed from the generator. This is a new set. There's very little wear on the old ones. I guess it's up to you. Do you want to spend $7.50 for a new set of brushes or use the old ones? I'm sure the old ones would be all right. If it was me, I'd put in new ones. We want a rebuilt generator. We're getting ready to install the brushes. And what I didn't say before, but what I always do, is I retap the aluminum brush holder. It's a 1032, and you don't want to have problems with threads there, because if you tear up that aluminum, now you got to go find a new brush holder. When I install the brushes, 1032 brass slotted screws are available. And I try to use new brass screws, because generally they've had the brushes changed a time or two and the threads or the heads are tore up on them. The third brush is the field wire. The other field wire goes to the grounded brush. The terminal wire goes to the insulated brush. So now we're going to install the brushes. We're going to lift the brush holder. Got to tighten it down a little bit in the back. This is the third brush, the thin brush.
The choo-choo train that takes me away from you. No words can tell how sad it makes me. It's me, Tootsie, and then do it over again.
Now we'll put in the last brush.
Watch for the mail. Watch for the mail. I'll never fail. I'll never fail. You don't get a letter, then you'll know I'm in jail. Toot-toot-tootsie, don't cry. Toot-toot-tootsie, goodbye. Goodbye.
We're sending power to the generator with the positive on the terminal and the negative on the ground. Now we move the brush bracket until the shaft has a tendency, stops, but has a tendency to go clockwise. There it's trying to go counterclockwise. There it's trying to go clockwise. Just as a reminder, in order to find the neutral position, you must have the third brush off of the commutator.
Chicago, Chicago, that toddling town. Chicago,
Well, now we're in a neutral position. So by being in a neutral position, we will tighten down the brush holder, and then we will adjust the draw of the generator by moving the third brush. If we don't have this in a neutral position, we'll never have enough adjustment on the third brush to be able to set our amp draw properly. Now that we've found a neutral position, we'll tighten the screws in the back.
Chicago, I'll show you around.
This is a tool that I built just to show you the amp draw on a generator. This is a 1/2 horsepower motor. It's tied to the generator, and it's got an amp meter. We'll move the third brush, showing about 10 amps and how hard this 1/2 horsepower motor has to turn to generate 10 amps. Now, we'll move the brush back to decrease the amp load, and you see how much easier the motor's turning. That's at about 6 amps. That's at about 0 amps. And there's at about 2 amps. You set the amp draw by moving the third brush forward or backward. When you get about the right amp draw, you tighten it down, you tighten your brush down with this special wrench. And it kind of takes this special wrench to do that, and they sell those at the vendors. You tighten it by tightening a bolt right back here. Do not over tighten. If you do, you'll break your insulators and be right back to 0. You can set this while it's in the car, which most people will have to do. We recommend you turn your headlights on, set the amp draw to about 0, then when the headlights are out, it'll pull about 3 amps. If you try to pull too many amps on this, the generator will burn up. The thing we have left to do is to put on the gear. Put on the gear with a pin. Do not use a roll pin. A roll pin will come out. Put it on, rivet the ends, then you're ready to go in the car. Once you get it in the car, you can set the amp draw to what you want.
Well, looks like we got a generator complete.
Yes, we do.
Like you said, I'm just going to say that again, put the gear on and you rivet that on, you pin that over.
Yes.
The roll pins will come out. So, folks, this is the way that Nick Nicholas approaches rebuilding, repairing, restoring, whichever term you want, a generator. The generator can be painted. You can do a lot of different things. This is the way that Nick approaches it. There's a lot of different ways to skin this cat, as all things Model T are, but we appreciate you taking the time. Nick, thank you for taking your time, but thank you all for visiting ModelT-Tips-com. Come and see us again.